The first drops of rain hit Rebecca Dawson's face like tiny daggers as she urged her exhausted mare forward across the vast Nebraska prairie. The year was 1878, and she had made a terrible mistake in thinking she could outride the brewing storm that had been threatening the horizon all afternoon. Now the sky had turned an ominous green-black, and the wind was picking up with frightening intensity. "Come on, Willow," she pleaded, patting the horse's straining neck. "Just a little farther." Rebecca had left her father's homestead that morning to deliver medicines to a neighboring family whose children had taken ill with fever. At 22, she had grown accustomed to making these journeys alone across the prairie, but never had she cut it this close with a storm. The return trip had taken longer than expected when Willow had thrown a shoe, forcing Rebecca to walk the horse for several miles. The wind suddenly gusted so strongly that Rebecca felt her body lift slightly from the saddle. Willow whinnied in distress, fighting against the reins as the first rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. The tall grass bent sideways in rippling waves, and Rebecca felt her heart pounding against her ribs. There was nowhere to shelter. No trees, no rocky outcroppings, not even a ditch deep enough to provide protection from what was clearly building into a dangerous prairie storm. In the distance, lightning split the darkening sky, and Rebecca counted 1, 2, 3 before the thunder crashed overhead. Too close. Far too close. She squinted through the increasingly heavy rainfall, desperately searching for any sign of shelter. That's when she spotted it, a small cabin nestled in a shallow depression about half a mile ahead. Smoke curled from its chimney despite the howling wind, a beacon of safety in the gathering tempest. "There, Willow," she cried, pointing the horse toward the structure. "We can make it." The rain was coming down in sheets now, drenching Rebecca's calico dress and plastering her auburn hair to her face and neck. Her fingers, gripping the reins, had gone numb with cold, and she could feel Willow struggling to maintain footing in the rapidly muddying ground. Another flash of lightning, much closer this time, was followed immediately by an explosive crack of thunder. Willow reared in terror, and Rebecca felt herself slipping from the saddle. She cried out as she hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. The spooked horse bolted a short distance away before stopping, trembling violently. Rebecca struggled to her feet, her sodden skirts weighing her down. The cabin was still several hundred yards distant. She stumbled toward Willow, hoping to remount, but another terrifying boom sent the horse dancing sideways, eyes rolling in fear. Whoa there. A deep voice cut through the storm's roar. Through the curtain of rain, Rebecca saw a tall figure on horseback approaching at a gallop. The rider pulled up beside Willow and grabbed her reins with practiced ease, then turned toward Rebecca. "Madam, you need to get to shelter now." He shouted over the wind. Without waiting for a response, he dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in typical cowboy attire: denim pants, flannel shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that somehow stayed on despite the furious wind. Water streamed from the brim as he approached. "I'm Preston James," he said, his voice raised to be heard over the storm. "That's my cabin yonder. We need to get there fast. This storm's turning nasty." Rebecca nodded gratefully, too cold and frightened to speak. Preston's eyes, a startling blue against his tanned, weather-beaten face, assessed her quickly. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she managed through chattering teeth. With strong hands, he helped her onto his own horse, then mounted behind her. He kept hold of Willow's reins as he spurred his horse toward the cabin. Rebecca found herself pressed against his chest, grateful for the warmth and stability of his presence as they raced the storm. They had covered half the distance when a sound rose above even the thunder, a high, thin wailing that made Preston curse under his breath. "Tornado," he said grimly into her ear. "Hang on tight." Rebecca turned her head and saw a massive funnel cloud touching down on the prairie less than a mile away, chewing up earth and debris as it moved in their general direction. Terror seized her throat. Preston pushed his horse to its limits. They reached the cabin just as the wind became a deafening roar. He practically threw Rebecca from the saddle and dragged her toward the door, leaving the horses to fend for themselves in the lean-to shelter attached to the cabin's side. Once inside, Preston barred the door against the wind and moved quickly to close the wooden shutters on the cabin's two small windows. The interior was dim but warm, with a small fire still burning in the stone hearth. "It's coming this way," Preston said, his voice tense as he peered through a crack in the shutters. "We need to." His words were cut off by a tremendous crash as something large struck the cabin. The entire structure shuddered. Rebecca screamed as one of the shutters tore free, allowing wind and rain to blast into the room. Preston rushed to the window, trying to secure it, but the force of the wind was too strong. "Get down," he shouted, abandoning the window and lunging toward her. Another crash, louder than the first, and part of the roof lifted. Rebecca could see the black sky swirling above as debris began to rain down into the cabin. Preston grabbed her around the waist and pulled her into the corner farthest from the damaged roof. He pushed her down and covered her body with his own as the storm tore through the cabin. Rebecca buried her face against his chest, feeling his arms tighten protectively around her as wood splintered and objects flew through the air. She could feel his heart pounding as fiercely as her own. His body shielded her from flying debris as the tornado passed directly overhead. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard, like 1,000 freight trains combined with the screams of the damned. For what seemed like an eternity, they huddled together as the storm raged. Preston's body remained rigid with tension, his arms locked around her, his face pressed against her hair. Rebecca clung to him, certain they would both be swept away at any moment. Then, gradually, the roaring began to diminish. The violent shaking of the cabin walls subsided. The terrible pressure in the air eased. Preston lifted his head cautiously, looking around at the devastation. Half the roof was gone and rain poured in freely, but the worst of the wind had passed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse as he loosened his grip enough to look down at her. Rebecca shook her head, though in truth she hadn't yet taken inventory of her condition. She was alive, that seemed miracle enough. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Preston helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "The storm's moving on, but we're not out of danger yet. This place isn't safe now." Rebecca looked around properly for the first time. The cabin was in shambles. Rain poured through the damaged roof, and the wind, though diminished, still gusted through the broken windows. Most of the furniture had been destroyed or flung about. The fire in the hearth had been extinguished by the rain. "The horses," she said suddenly, remembering Willow. Preston moved to what remained of the door and peered out. "The lean-to's damaged, but it's standing." Horses looked spooked but unharmed. Relief flooded through Rebecca, then she realized she hadn't even introduced herself. "I'm Rebecca Dawson," she said. "I was returning home from the Patterson farm when the storm caught me." "The Pattersons?" "They're a good 10 miles east of here," Preston said, surprised. "You've come a long way. Their children have fever. I brought medicines from my father. He's the doctor in Cottonwood Springs." Understanding dawned on Preston's face. "Dr. Dawson's daughter." "I've heard of you both, though we haven't crossed paths. I only settled here last spring." The rain was lessening now, though the sky remained dark. Preston retrieved a lantern that had somehow survived the chaos and lit it, casting a warm glow over the wrecked interior. "We can't stay here tonight," he said, surveying the damage. "My nearest neighbor is the Wilson place, about 3 miles west. We should head there before it gets completely dark." Rebecca nodded, though the thought of getting back on a horse and riding through the storm-ravaged prairie filled her with dread. Preston seemed to read her expression. "We'll take it slow," he assured her. "The worst has passed." Preston salvaged what he could from the cabin: some food, a couple of blankets, his rifle. He helped Rebecca wrap one of the blankets around her shoulders, his hands lingering briefly. "You're still shivering," he said, concern evident in his voice. "I'll be fine once we're moving," she replied, though in truth she felt bone-weary and cold to her core. The horses were indeed shaken but uninjured. Preston helped Rebecca mount Willow, checking the mare's legs and hooves before he was satisfied she was fit to ride. He then mounted his own horse, a sturdy brown gelding. "Stay close," he instructed as they set out. The prairie was transformed in the storm's wake. Debris littered the landscape: uprooted plants, branches from distant trees. even items that must have been carried for miles by the tornado's fury. The rain had tapered to a drizzle, but the ground was saturated, making for treacherous footing. They rode slowly, picking their way carefully. "Have you been in these parts long?" Preston asked after they had ridden in silence for a time. "All my life," Rebecca replied. "My father came here as a young doctor just after the war. My mother died when I was 14, so it's been just the two of us since then." Preston nodded. "I'm sorry about your mother. My own parents are back east. I came west after serving in the army, wanted to make my own way." "And now your home is destroyed," Rebecca said softly. Preston shrugged. "It's just wood and nails. I can rebuild." They rode on as the daylight faded. The clouds were breaking up now, allowing glimpses of stars in the darkening sky. Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca found herself studying Preston's profile when he wasn't looking. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and those remarkable blue eyes. His light brown hair curled damply at his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks. "There it is," Preston said eventually, pointing to a light in the distance. "The Wilson place." The relief Rebecca felt was overwhelming. As they approached the farmhouse, a man came out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Who goes there?" he called. "Preston James, Henry, and Dr. Dawson's daughter." "We've been caught in the storm." Henry Wilson lowered his weapon. "Lord Almighty, we thought that tornado might have gone right over you, Preston. Come in, come in." The Wilsons were a middle-aged couple whose children were grown and gone. Martha Wilson fussed over Rebecca, insisting she change into dry clothes immediately. She led Rebecca to a bedroom where she provided one of her daughter's dresses, slightly too large but blessedly dry. When Rebecca emerged, she found Preston sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands. He had changed as well into clothes borrowed from Henry. He stood when she entered, and something in his expression made her cheeks warm. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." Martha insisted on feeding them both a hearty stew, and Rebecca realized she was famished. As they ate, Preston described the storm's destruction to the Wilsons. "You can stay here as long as you need," Henry offered. "Both of you." "I need to get home," Rebecca said. "My father will be worried sick." "Not tonight," Martha said firmly. "The roads will be washed out and it's too dangerous in the dark. You'll start fresh in the morning." Rebecca knew she was right, though she hated to think of her father's concern. "Could you get word to him somehow?" she asked. "I'll ride to the Collins farm first thing," Henry said. "They've got that new telephone line to town. We can get a message to your pa that way." Reassured, Rebecca allowed herself to relax. After dinner, they gathered in the Wilsons' cozy sitting room. The conversation flowed easily, and Rebecca found herself watching Preston as he described his plans for his land. He spoke with passion about the horse breeding operation he hoped to establish, his eyes lighting up as he detailed his vision. When Martha noticed Rebecca stifling a yawn, she insisted it was time for bed. "Rebecca, you take the guest room. Preston, I'm afraid it'll have to be the sofa for you." Later, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Rebecca found herself replaying the day's events. The terror of the storm, the feeling of Preston's arms around her as he shielded her from harm, the surprising ease she felt in his company afterward. She had met many men in Cottonwood Springs, had even been courted by a few, but none had affected her the way Preston James did after just one day. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with swirling winds and piercing blue eyes. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that the storm's path had been narrow but devastating. Henry returned from the Collins farm with news that Rebecca's father had indeed been frantic, but was now relieved to know she was safe. He would meet her in town the following day. "I'll escort you," Preston offered immediately. "I need to go to town anyway, see about materials to rebuild." Rebecca accepted gratefully, though she wondered why the prospect of spending another day in his company made her pulse quicken. They set out after breakfast, following the main road toward Cottonwood Springs. The journey would take most of the day, with detours around flood-damaged sections. As they rode, Rebecca found herself opening up to Preston in a way she rarely did with others. "After my mother died, I started helping my father with his practice," she explained. "He taught me about medicines, treatments. I'm not a trained nurse, but the people around here have come to trust me." That's impressive, Preston said sincerely. Most doctors I've known are pretty protective of their knowledge. Father believes in education for women. He wanted me to go east for schooling, but I couldn't leave him alone. Preston nodded thoughtfully. You two must be close. We are. What about your family? Preston's expression grew more reserved. My father's a banker in Boston. He wanted me to join the family business, but after the war, I couldn't go back to that life. We don't speak much these days. I'm sorry, Rebecca said softly. He shrugged. It was my choice to come west. Best decision I ever made, even with tornadoes tearing my roof off. His smile returned, warming his eyes. They stopped to rest the horses around midday, sharing the food Martha Wilson had packed for them. Sitting beneath a lone cottonwood tree, they talked about books they had read, places they hoped to see someday. Rebecca was surprised to discover that beneath Preston's rugged exterior was a well-educated, thoughtful man with a wry sense of humor. As they prepared to continue their journey, Preston helped Rebecca back onto her horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Rebecca felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. They reached the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs as the sun was beginning to set. The small prairie town was a welcome sight after the long ride. People were out and about, many discussing the storm and its aftermath. Rebecca received several concerned greetings as they rode down the main street. Rebecca, thank God, Dr. Andrew Dawson hurried from his office when he spotted his daughter. A tall, distinguished man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, he embraced Rebecca tightly when she dismounted. I'm fine, Father, she assured him. Thanks to Mr. James here, Doctor. Dawson turned to Preston, extending his hand. I understand I owe you my daughter's life, sir. Preston shook his hand firmly. She'd have managed just fine without me, I'm sure. Your daughter's quite resourceful. Nevertheless, you have my deepest gratitude. Please, you must stay with us tonight. It's the least we can offer. Preston hesitated. I don't want to impose. Nonsense, Dr. Dawson insisted. Our home is yours for as long as you need. Rebecca found herself hoping Preston would accept, and when he did, her heart lightened. The Dawson home was a comfortable two-story house at the edge of town, with Dr. Dawson's medical practice occupying part of the ground floor. As they settled in for the evening, Rebecca noticed how naturally Preston fit into their home, helping with chores without being asked, engaging her father in thoughtful conversation over dinner. So you're planning to breed horses? Dr. Dawson asked, clearly impressed by Preston's knowledge. Yes, sir. I've saved enough to purchase good breeding stock. The tornado's a setback, but not an insurmountable one. Admirable determination, Dr. Dawson commented. How long will it take you to rebuild? Preston considered. With help, perhaps a few weeks. Alone, considerably longer. I'm sure many in town would be willing to assist, Rebecca suggested. We take care of our neighbors here. Preston smiled at her. I'm beginning to see that. Later that evening, after her father had retired, Rebecca found Preston on the front porch, gazing at the stars. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night's chill. Beautiful night, she said, looking up at the crystal-clear sky. Hard to believe yesterday's storm. Preston nodded. Nature's like that, destructive one moment, peaceful the next. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, shoulders nearly touching as they leaned against the porch railing. I wanted to thank you again, Rebecca said finally. For what you did during the storm, not many men would have. Any man would have done the same, Preston interrupted. Rebecca shook her head. No, not any man would have risked himself like that. She turned to face him. You could have been killed protecting me. In the soft glow from the house windows, Preston's eyes were impossibly blue. It didn't feel like a choice, he said quietly. It felt like the only thing I could do. Rebecca's breath caught as he reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. I know we've only just met, he said, his voice low, but I feel like... Like what? Rebecca whispered when he didn't continue. Like maybe that storm blew me right where I was meant to be. The week that followed brought many changes to Rebecca's life. Preston stayed in town while organizing materials and help for rebuilding his cabin. Each evening, he returned to the Dawson home, where he and Rebecca spent hours talking on the porch or by the fireplace. Dr. Dawson observed their growing closeness with quiet approval, having taken an immediate liking to the young cowboy. True to Rebecca's prediction, many townspeople volunteered to help Preston rebuild. The community barn-raising spirit was strong on the frontier, where everyone understood that survival depended on neighbors helping neighbors. Even Dr. Dawson closed his practice for 2 days to join the effort. Rebecca rode out daily to the building site, bringing food and supplies. She watched as Preston directed the work with natural leadership, his respect for the volunteers evident in every interaction. The new cabin was larger and sturdier than the original, with proper windows and a stone chimney. "This is going to be a real home," she commented one afternoon as they sat together during a break in the work. Preston looked at her for a long moment. "It could be," he said meaningfully. As the cabin neared completion, Rebecca found herself dreading the day Preston would move back to his land. Their time together had become precious to her, their connection deepening with each passing day. She had learned about his experiences in the war, his dreams for the future, his quiet strength and integrity. And she had shared with him her own hopes and fears, her love of medicine, her occasional loneliness. The evening before Preston planned to return to his property, they walked together along the creek that ran behind the Dawson home. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, reflecting in the water. "I'll be riding into town regularly," Preston said, breaking a comfortable silence. "For supplies and such." Rebecca nodded, trying to hide her disappointment that their daily conversations would end. "You're always welcome at our home." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. "Rebecca," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these past days have been the happiest I can remember." Her heart began to race. "For me as well," she admitted. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything." His eyes held her steadily. "I'm falling in love with you." Joy burst through Rebecca like sunshine. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. Preston's smile was radiant. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Rebecca rose on tiptoes to meet him. Their first kiss was gentle, tender, a promise of things to come. When they returned to the house, hand in hand, Dr. Dawson took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. Over the next month, Preston courted Rebecca properly. He rode into town several times a week, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, a handcrafted wooden box for her medical supplies. On Sundays, he attended church with the Dawsons and took Rebecca for drives in his newly purchased buggy. Rebecca visited his land as well, marveling at the transformation. The cabin was complete, the tornado damage cleared away. Preston had acquired his first breeding horses, a magnificent stallion and 2 fine mares. He showed her his plans for expanding, for building proper stables and corrals. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, watching him with the horses. His gentle confidence with the animals spoke volumes about his character. "It's just the beginning," he replied. "I want to build something lasting here." Their courtship progressed steadily, with the approval of both Dr. Dawson and the community. Preston quickly became a respected figure in Cottonwood Springs, known for his fair dealings and willingness to help others. Rebecca continued her work with her father, but increasingly found herself thinking of a future that combined both medicine and a life with Preston. 3 months after the tornado that had brought them together, Preston asked Rebecca to ride with him to a special place he had discovered on his property, a small rise overlooking the prairie, where wildflowers grew in abundance and the view stretched for miles. They dismounted and spread a blanket on the ground. Preston seemed unusually nervous as they sat together, watching the clouds drift across the vast blue sky. "I've been thinking," he began, "about that day we met. How random it was that you happened to be caught in that storm, that you spotted my cabin." Rebecca smiled. "Providence, perhaps. I've come to believe that," Preston agreed, "because finding you, it changed everything for me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been saving for years, planning for my future out here, but now that future means nothing without you in it." Rebecca's breath caught as Preston opened the pouch and removed a simple but beautiful gold ring with a small diamond. I spoke with your father yesterday, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. He gave his blessing but said the decision was entirely yours. Preston took her hand. Rebecca Dawson, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here on the prairie? Tears of joy filled Rebecca's eyes. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, with all my heart. The ring fit perfectly as Preston slipped it onto her finger. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, sweet and full of hope for the future. Their wedding took place that autumn when the prairie grasses had turned golden and the harvest was complete. The entire community gathered to celebrate, the church overflowing with well-wishers. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Martha Wilson's skilled hands. Preston stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Dr. Dawson's toast at the reception brought tears to many eyes. To my beloved daughter, and the man who shielded her from the storm, may your love provide shelter for each other through all of life's tempests. They established their home on Preston's land, with Rebecca riding into town 3 days a week to continue helping her father. The cabin, once a simple bachelor's dwelling, became a warm and inviting home under Rebecca's touch. They added a small room where she could tend to nearby families who needed medical attention but couldn't make it to town. Preston's horse breeding business flourished, his reputation for quality stock spreading throughout the territory. By their first anniversary, they had begun construction on a larger home to accommodate their growing dreams and family. Rebecca discovered she was expecting their first child as the new house neared completion. Preston's joy knew no bounds, his protective nature intensifying as her pregnancy progressed. He insisted on accompanying her on her medical rounds whenever possible, unwilling to risk her being caught in another storm or other danger. The following spring, as new life emerged across the prairie, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Lily. Dr. Dawson assisted with the delivery in their new home, his skilled hands and proud smile welcoming his granddaughter into the world. Standing by the window with Lily in his arms, Preston gazed out at the prairie where he and Rebecca had begun their journey together. Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate I am, he said softly. That storm could have taken everything, but instead it gave me everything. Rebecca joined him, her head resting against his shoulder as they looked out at their land, their future. From destruction came new life, she murmured, touching their daughter's tiny hand. Years passed, and their family and prosperity grew together. They added a son, Daniel, 2 years after Lily's birth. Preston's horse breeding operation became one of the most successful in the state, while Rebecca continued her medical work, eventually becoming a formally trained nurse through a program in Omaha. Dr. Dawson retired gradually, spending more time with his grandchildren and less in his practice. He eventually moved into a comfortable addition built onto Preston and Rebecca's home, where he could enjoy his family while maintaining his independence. Life on the prairie was never easy. There were droughts and blizzards, financial uncertainties, and occasional illnesses. But through it all, Preston and Rebecca faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing year. On the 5th anniversary of the tornado that had brought them together, they returned to the spot where Preston had proposed. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the prairie in vibrant colors. Their children played nearby, supervised by Dr. Dawson, while Preston and Rebecca walked hand in hand. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Rebecca asked, "if that storm had taken another path?" Preston considered her question seriously. "I believe I would have found you somehow," he said finally. "Maybe not that day, but someday. Some souls are meant to find each other." Rebecca squeezed his hand, remembering the feeling of his body covering hers as the tornado raged overhead, his instinctive need to protect her even when they were strangers. "From the moment you shielded me from that storm, I felt safe with you," she said. "Not just physically safe, but home." Preston drew her into his arms, his eyes reflecting the same love they had shown on their wedding day. "And that's what we've built together," he said. "Not just a house or a business, but a home, a shelter against whatever storms may come." As the prairie wind gently rustled the tall grass around them, Rebecca stood on tiptoe to kiss the man who had once covered her with his body against a raging tornado, the man who continued to be her shelter, her partner, her love. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land they had tamed together, she knew with absolute certainty that some storms were blessings in disguise, forces of nature that destroyed only to create something infinitely more precious in their wake.